Friends and subscribers, you are looking at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, one of 13 Federal Reserve banks spread out throughout the United States that is involved of the control of U.S. currency. So let's see what's inside and go on the tour, and hopefully be able to ask some serious questions about the operations of the Chicago Fed. Don't you just love this propaganda? A century of service. They're celebrating 100 years of the Federal Reserve on the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, and on the walls they have many different promotional murals. One of them says keeping currency secure, selling war bonds, and so on and so on. Stability for the future. And as we know now, with inflation so high and taxes that are paid to pay down only the interest on the Federal Reserve debt, not the principal, are a number of reasons why Americans are in dire straits financially. Is because of this Goliath of financial manipulation of the currency. Interestingly enough, that you may not know for sure, but I'll tell you, when they finally got the Federal Reserve Act passed through Congress on Christmas Eve, they never thought that it would last as long as it did. They only intended or only suspected that the Federal Reserve Act would go for 25 or 30 years because that's how long the first and second Bank of the United States lasted. So they figured that at that point, at the 25-30 year mark, they would have to again try to get another act passed or find some other way to get control of the money supply. And never in their wildest dreams did they know that it would work out as well as it has. 100 years of slavery or financial manipulation, however you want to look at it. But it's been a smashing success for them and a disaster for the Americans. This has got to be my favorite mural of all of them, A Century of Service, protecting against counterfeit bills. That really makes me laugh because, as you know, every Federal Reserve note that comes out is counterfeit because it was never ratified, the Federal Reserve Act, by all the states. And as we know, it's backed by nothing, and they keep their books in secrecy. So we don't really know how many Federal Reserve notes have been printed or how many electronic notes have been issued. And if you don't have that transparency, then you don't have a legit currency. The discount window, and this kind of like educates you about the discount window and what it means, but what they don't tell you is that the discount window is available to whoever is Fed friendly, if you know what I mean. And there is no official tour, there's just a museum here, and you can't really have any question and answer with anybody that works in the hierarchy of the Fed. You can just have dialogue with the museum person that will do question and answer, but you can't actually talk to anybody upstairs, so to speak. A la Eustace Mullins. He is the guy that wrote the quintessential book on the Federal Reserve and has been plagiarized ever since. He actually has, had some discussions with some people in the New York Fed and other Fed locations, but I doubt that I'll be able to get anything like that. Here's a big stack of $1 bills. All of these are minted by the Chicago Fed and are, of course, counterfeit because it is Federal Reserve notes, as you know, not U.S. notes. And that big cube of money right there is absolutely worthless. Okay, there's 2,000 pounds of $1 notes there, and that's interesting. Is it real or fake? You have all these notes here from all the years of the Federal Reserve notes, and you can do a test to see if it's genuine or counterfeit. Now, what's interesting about this is that me personally, I know more, I guess, about the renminbi as if it's real or fake over the last several years, and I'm not sure if I could pass this test or not, but in fact they're all fake. I mean, all of these Fed notes are backed by nothing. and of course are not federal. So you can just click counterfeit on every single one of these, and you would technically be right. Looking at $1 million in $100 bills right here sitting in front of me, and as with the other cash that I've shown you, what would I do with that million? Well, I can tell you that I would not deposit it into a bank, and I certainly would not be investing in anything but hard assets. Got a propaganda video here talking about how the Fed's primary responsibility is to stabilize prices, and talks about how they stepped in and they saved the United States economy when several central banks folded. But what they don't say, of course, is that the Federal Reserve, or the bankers behind the Fed, were mainly responsible for the collapse of the U.S. central banks that came about. And if you read the writings, the personal writings of Thomas Jefferson, you'll see that he understood banking probably as well as anybody in the world. And many of his personal writings, you'll read about his objections to the Fed, and how he knew at the time that the Federal Reserve would eventually destroy the nation's currency, and it certainly has today. Have you noticed the prices for commodities across the board? Have you noticed how the Fed has done a very poor job of preventing the exact thing that they claim to be $1 million worth? This is very funny here. You can adjust the inflation rate here, and if we adjust the inflation rate to what the real inflation rate is, and we go over a period of well, it's been 100 years, right? And then we can find out exactly how much $1 million is worth, and we can see that it's not much. Here's a stack of $20 notes, all honeycombed up there. And boy, oh boy, wouldn't I like to have that. The first thing I would do was buy gold and silver coins, and then I would have something, wouldn't I? Here's the story of the Federal Reserve and the creation, but what they don't tell you is how they met in secret at Jekyll Island. And they herald Woodrow Wilson as being a great man that enacted the Federal Reserve Act. But what they don't tell you here, of course, is that Wilson regretted that on his death, that he had destroyed once a great nation, and that is certainly coming to fruition now. There's Woodrow Wilson right there, and the rest, as they say, is pure fiction right here. Fighting Inflation is talking about late 1979, when silver had actually reached to $50 an ounce, and there was a lot of inflation, and it talks about the Fed's role. But what they're not saying is that the Fed doesn't just control inflation, they control the velocity of $2.5 gold coin 1873, and that goes back to Civil War times. $10 gold piece 1881, right there it is. Interestingly enough, none of these coins here were minted by the Fed, yet they have them on display as if they are Fed coins. $1 gold coin right there as well, and boy, I wish I had those. You know, the numismatic quality is definitely built in, and those things look like they're nearly perfect, obviously minted and never circulated. Whether you know it or not, in the early days of the United States, the colonial America, Spanish coins were actually used for trade, because the West Indies was Spanish and Portuguese and French brought them into the American colonies, and what they did, because money was in so short supply, they would cut the coins into bits, and just as the Romans did back in the day, they would actually cut off bits of those and use those. And here's a pine tree shilling, Massachusetts colony, 1652. They were minting their own coins, and that's actually not a bad looking coin. I'd love to get my hands on that one too. That's got to be quite rare, especially in the condition that it's in. Hard to say what it would fetch, but here's some £1 notes, New York colony, and continental currency. The continental was also successful. And that was one of the reasons why the British wanted war, because the Continental was circumventing their currency and making the colonists prosperous. They've got actual U.S. notes here, but they have nothing to do with the Fed. But they've got them on display here as if they are part of the Federal Reserve. But these notes here, Home National Bank of Massachusetts, $2 note, that was before the Fed, and that has nothing to do with the Fed. And you have all these other notes here that are legal tender or were legal tender from the various states, but are long before the Fed got its clutches on U.S. monetary policy. Hey, take a look at that. There's a 1923 Liberty coin on display, $20 gold certificate, and so on. So my day at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, and all I got was these Federal Reserve note shreds. Well, okay, but I didn't get any questions answered. Wasn't able to talk to anybody in the upper echelon of the Chicago Fed. The key questions, such as why the Fed doesn't reveal their books, or who are the owners of the Fed, and why there needs to be a discount window at all when the money is created out of nothing, and why it's debt-based money, and so on, were never answered. And as you can imagine, it probably never will be by anybody from the Federal Reserve.